Today, we're diving into one of the most thrilling and action-packed stories in the Bible, the tale of Samson, a man with superhuman strength, a hero chosen by God to deliver his people from their enemies. But with great power comes great responsibility, and Samson's journey is filled with dramatic twists, dangerous encounters, and powerful lessons about faith, strength, and redemption. From his miraculous birth and extraordinary feats to his ultimate downfall and final act of heroism, Samson's story is one you won't want to miss. So sit back, hit that like button. To set the stage for Samson's birth, Israel was under the rule and oppression of the Philistines. Samson was born a Nazirite and was chosen by God to fulfill his work in Israel, and he was given extraordinary strength to do it. The book of Judges contains the story of his life. At this point, the author introduces us to a man named Manoah, whose wife was unable to conceive. An angel of the Lord appeared to her and said she would give birth to a son. This miraculous son would be Israel's next deliverer. This is a unique event that happened several times in the Bible, such as the birth of Isaac in the Old Testament and John in the New Testament. This promised boy would grow up to save Israel from the power of the Philistines. With this role came a job condition that none of the other judges had. The angel told Manoah's wife to raise the child according to the Nazirite vow. This vow is explained in Numbers chapter 6, verse 1 to 5. The Lord said to Moses to speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink. They must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. As long as they remain under their Nazirite vow, they must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or skins. During the entire period of their Nazirite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the period of their dedication to the Lord is over. They must let their hair grow long. This meant he couldn't drink wine or beer, and he couldn't trim his hair. Interestingly, the angel advised the woman not to consume wine or beer while she was pregnant, nor to eat anything unclean. That meant her son would be consecrated to God as a Nazirite, even while he was still in the womb. Despite the fact that the heavenly visitor was speaking directly to her, the woman went to her husband and informed him what had transpired. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born." And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, "Look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me." So Manoah arose and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." Manoah said, "Now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work?" So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I commanded her, let her observe." Manoah probably mistook him for a mere man sent from the Lord and said, "Please stay here, and we will prepare a young goat for you." The visitor agreed to stay, but said he wouldn't eat anything. It would be more appropriate for the couple to offer a burnt offering. When Manoah put the burnt offering on a rock as requested, the visitor did something miraculous. He rose in the flame and went up in the sky. At the sight, Manoah and his wife collapsed face down on the ground. Suddenly, Manoah was terrified and said, "We're certainly going to die because we have seen God." He rightly equated the angel of the Lord with God. His wife said to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands. Nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time." So the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahane Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. Manoah's wife named her child Samson. God blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, readying Samson for the work prepared for him. Samson made some questionable life decisions for a man who had been set apart for God's service since birth, ultimately proving that God can use a person in spite of himself. Samson went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman there. He told his parents that he wanted to marry her. His parents tried to speak wisdom into his life by telling him he should not marry someone who is not part of God's people, but they didn't know that his interest in this particular woman was from the Lord, who wanted the Philistines to provide an opportunity for a confrontation. Samson was attacked by a young lion on his journey to Timnah, where his bride-to-be lived. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him fiercely, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands. This was a strong indication that he had been chosen and enabled by God for a supernatural mission. Samson chose to pose a riddle to the Philistines at a feast that was most likely supposed to function as his engagement party. The price for answering the riddle within a week would be 30 changes of clothes. In biblical days, an additional set of clothing was a sign of honor and dignity. Samson, thinking about his recent kill and the honey that accompanied it, exclaimed, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." The Philistines grew enraged when they couldn't figure out what it meant. The men threatened to kill Samson's bride, who was also one of their own, and her family unless she could get Samson to reveal the answer and share it with them. Frightened, she wept in front of Samson for 7 days, and finally, he couldn't take it anymore. Because she had nagged him so much, he revealed the solution to her. Later, when the Philistine men parroted the answer, Samson knew how they had obtained it. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he killed 30 Philistine men in another town, giving their clothes to these men to keep the deal he'd struck. He returned home after that, but not with his wife. After some time, Samson brought about further destruction on the Philistines. He wanted to visit his wife, but her father would not let him enter her room. He had given her to another man because he assumed Samson was not happy with her. He destroyed their crops by catching 300 foxes, tying their tails together with rope and torches, setting them on fire, and releasing them into their fields. The Philistines retaliated by slaying Samson's wife and father, and Samson in turn avenged the murders with his bare hands. The Philistines besieged a village in Judah to pay Samson back while he was hiding in a cave. To pacify the Philistines, 3,000 men of Judah went to arrest Samson, saying that he had brought trouble on them by riling up the Philistine oppressors. Don't miss the irony here. They chose to deliver over to the Philistines the man God had sent to save them from the Philistines. Samson agreed to go along with them only after they promised not to kill him themselves. When the Philistines saw Samson tide approaching, they screamed out, but at that precise moment, the Lord's Spirit descended upon Samson in a strong way. This was bad news for the Philistines. Samson's foes were outnumbered because he was empowered by God's Spirit. Given his strength, the ropes used to bind him were insignificant. He found a fresh donkey jawbone and used it to slaughter 1,000 men. He was able to accomplish what would have been impossible without the Lord's help. After finishing his judgment on the Philistines, Samson got extremely thirsty and cried out to the Lord. The Lord graciously replied by restoring his vigor by creating a spring there. It was dubbed Spring of the One Who Cried Out by Samson, and he judged Israel for 20 years. When the Lord's Spirit descended upon Samson, he was accompanied by miraculous activity. In the Old Testament, the Lord's Spirit descended on people in response to specific circumstances. Since the time of the New Testament, however, the Lord's Spirit has come to dwell in every believer. That means, on this side of the cross, the supernatural presence of God is not related to the Spirit coming upon believers, but to the fullness of the Spirit at work within us. The Spirit came powerfully on Samson for supernatural purposes. This same Spirit is still with us today. We are so preoccupied with living life according to the rules of the world that we forget to recognize His presence in our lives. We should, on the other hand, be filled with the Spirit, which essentially implies living under His authority. Samson's personal choices become even more concerning at this point in the narrative. Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute and went to bed with her. For years, the people of Israel had prostituted themselves with other gods. They had blatantly compromised with the surrounding culture and betrayed the Lord. And by this season of his life, Samson the leader was openly living in a way that reflected what Israel had been doing. This trend would be his downfall. The Philistines in Gaza discovered Samson was with the prostitute and thought they could seize him when he was less powerful. Instead, he seized the city gate, lifting it out of the ground and carrying it to the top of a hill. Given how enormous and heavy ancient city gates were, this was an incredible display of power. Samson fell in love with Delilah after a short while. She was a woman from the valley of Sorek, who the Philistine lords used to locate the source of Samson's strength. Each Philistine leader promised Delilah 100 pieces of silver if she could figure it out, which was a significant sum of money in those days. Samson lied to her 3 times, giving her false answers. Each time, Delilah would do what Samson said, but his strength never wavered. This would be amusing if it were not so tragic. She prodded him every day until he could no longer stand it. He eventually admitted the truth about his Nazirite commitment and his hair. Because Samson had been breaking the Nazirite vow, he thought breaking another aspect of it would not matter, but he was mistaken. Delilah arranged for someone to shave off his hair while he slept, and he awoke to the familiar war cry of the Philistines. Samson didn't know that the Lord had abandoned him. This time he was powerless. They seized him, gouged out his eyes, and led him away in shackles to Gaza. They forced him to grind grain in prison. However, his hair began to grow again. This might have given the Philistines pause, but they assumed Samson was no longer a threat. After all, he was blind, and the source of his strength had supposedly been cut off. The Philistines gathered at their temple for a festival to honor their god, Dagon, and to celebrate Samson's capture. They assumed their deity had vanquished him, so they summoned Samson to provide entertainment. He was led to the temple pillars so he could be put on display. But Samson prayed to the Lord, asking for strength one more time. He put his hands on the 2 middle pillars and said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed against the pillars with all his might, and the temple collapsed, killing him and everyone else in it. Samson killed more Philistines in his death than he had in his life. Despite his failures and imperfections, Samson was used by God to deliver Israel from their enemies. His story reminds us of God's power to work through even the most flawed individuals to fulfill his purposes. Samson's strength came from God, and in the end, he recognized his dependence on him. His story is a testament to God's grace, power, and sovereignty.